Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Vista webinar, Thought Leadership That Converts. I'm your host, Hondo Lewis, co-founder and president at PartnerVista. Today, we're diving into one of the biggest challenges partner marketers face, not just creating content, but creating content that actually converts. We'll find out what that means and how you can steal the playbook, but before we dive in, I have a special message. Today's webinar is sponsored by Beettoo, a modern global B2B agency built for today's brand-to-demand reality. Beettoo brings together top-tier media, analytics, and content experts through its agile, liquid resource model. Their content division, the Expert Network, blends human intelligence with AI to create thought leadership that drives real engagement and conversion. If you're serious about elevating B2B performance, Beettoo is a partner worth knowing. We certainly think so, as they are a new partner in our ecosystem and our first webinar sponsor. So thank you, Beettoo. And if you didn't know, PartnerVista is a partner marketing engine with full suite media capabilities built specifically for co-partner initiatives and co-marketing motions. We design strategic programs that amplify the better together or ecosystem story, from awareness and thought leadership to qualified pipeline and sales activation. Our frameworks educate, engage, nurture, and further qualify your target audience, helping bring deals closer to closed won. PartnerVista, built with partner marketers for partner marketers. Now, on to my guest, a seasoned ecosystem marketing leader bringing more than 25 years of experience, including transforming hyperscaler and partner marketing at SAP, and now leads global partnerships with the likes of NVIDIA, Google, AWS, and Microsoft at ServiceNow. Please welcome Roisin Monaghan.
Thank you, Hondo. Hi, everybody. Roisin Monaghan here. And as Hondo said, I am the lead for hyperscaler and NVIDIA partner marketing at ServiceNow. And I'm joining from the San Francisco Bay Area in California. And a fun fact about the San Francisco Bay Area is actually I'm originally Irish and I've been here in the Bay Area for 30 plus years. And a definite fun fact is that the Bay Area is actually sunnier than Ireland. Who knew?
Who knew? Who knew? Well, you'll take the sunshine when you can get it. I heard there's been some rain spells there. So enjoy and soak up the sunshine. And my next guest, with more than 3 decades in international B2B marketing, including building the world's largest B2B agency network at Dentsu, he now leads and is founder of the Beettoo Group. Please welcome Stuart Giddings.
Hi, Hondo. Great to be on. I'm Stuart Giddings. I'm calling in from London. I'm actually in my home office in South London. My normal office is in the middle of Borough Market. And a fun fact, my normal view from my office is the Shard, which I found out recently is the tallest building in Western Europe. So it kind of blocks most of the light, but it's still a nice office. And talking of rain, we've had 40 days and 40 nights of it. So we actually had a little bit of sun today, but looking forward to today's conversation.
Well, very nice. Hopefully we can keep this conversation nice and sunny and spread the joy to everyone. So thank you for being here. We loved having you. Before we jump in, I'd love for us to kind of level set. In marketing today, what does thought leadership actually mean? And where do you see teams kind of getting it right or, quite frankly, getting it wrong? So, Stuart, let's start with you, given your broad perspective that you bring to the game.
Sure. I think broadly, content has never been more important. I think it's often been a poor relation to data. It's often been a bit too much of an afterthought. And there's rightly been a big focus on data in terms of performance marketing, in partner marketing, and more broadly in B2B for the last sort of 10 plus years. And that's been amazing, the developments in data. But I've often felt that the content side of that equation has been a little lacking and been given less attention. I think with the advent of AI summaries and the move potentially to zero click, the importance of good content, high quality content has never been greater. And so we're kind of on a mission to help improve that and work with clients to improve that. So I think trust in brands when you think of the effects of AI particularly, has made the content conversation, put it right to the forefront. And I think it's never been more important. So yeah, I'm interested today to talk through that in a bit more detail about the various aspects of it.
Sure. And Roisin, what does thought leadership mean to you, and really kind of from an ecosystem perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, kind of just adding to what Stuart has already said as well, just in a partner context, to me, thought leadership content is really about elevating the conversation beyond ServiceNow's, at this point in time, ServiceNow's own product story. And it means helping our partners to bring that credible, forward looking perspectives to their customers. And these perspectives have to reflect that combined intelligence of the ecosystem, not just one vendor's viewpoint. So it's really kind of nuancing kind of ServiceNow plus the partners that we're working with, like the hyperscalers like AWS, Google, Microsoft, and NVIDIA, and what is the most powerful content that we can create together. And it's not just about, what is ServiceNow on a hyperscaler platform. It's more kind of aligned with what are the pain points that customers are feeling, how are enterprises navigating AI transformation, what do they need to know, and how do we jointly together with our partners enable that. And the partner lens really kind of adds that legitimacy and reach. And it kind of also says it's not just us, ServiceNow, talking about ourselves, but it's also kind of bringing in that more holistic approach that really kind of brings value for a customer.
Sure. No, it's all about the nuances, right? With especially when we're talking about partner marketing. So I guess if we bring it out, to the micro level, are most teams still confusing volume with impact? And this is
So for me, yeah. I think they're, on the one hand, it's good that marketers and partner marketers recognize that there's a need for more content and a variety of content. On the other hand, I think to your point, there is quite a lot of evidence that shows that people think quantity rather than quality. So they're putting lots of stuff out there. They're probably using AI more than should be the case. Multiple formats, often punchy, snappy pieces of snackable content, which again can work really well in a B2C environment. Some of the platforms like, for example, on LinkedIn, it can be a publishing platform. You can put long form content on there. So I think there has been recently, especially with the increase in AI content, a focus on quantity over quality. And the reality is you need both. You've got to have high quality content. You've got to have it out there regularly, and you've got to have it in multiple formats. But I think the quality is suffering a bit for those that are maybe putting quantity over the quality approach. Yeah.
And we certainly see it out there. I mean, there's lots of content out there, but is it resonating? And I'd love to hear from you, Roisin. Like, is it really about volume over, is it quality over, is it quality over quantity?
Yeah, I mean, I would say right now, yes, I would absolutely say that with the advent of AI and the ability that AI has to create content, I think the quality aspect is starting to kind of level up. And I would say, as partner marketers, we need to kind of stop building multiple pieces of content. We need to build one piece of content that travels and build one story and not build one piece of content that tries to talk to everybody, but build one core story that actually travels and that you can leverage and has a shelf life and that you can syndicate and curate throughout a buyer journey. And, in partner marketing, the temptation is to create a single asset that covers the full joint value proposition for every audience. And that really ends up serving nobody well. So I would say the quality aspect starts to really come to light here. And we should be starting to think about what is one sharp, well evidenced customer story from the partnership and what is a real outcome that was derived from that, what's a real industry or a real problem solved. And then we build modular versions of it, slide for the partner seller, for example, a digital story on a website, a one pager for the economic buyer, a technical brief for the evaluator. The story's the same, but the lens actually changes and the content piece itself changes depending on who's reading it. So that's what I think is, kind of starting to take shape out there in terms of quality versus quantity. I think quality is starting to become more important, because the quantity of content that is being produced is just growing dynamically and exponentially.
I think
No.
just to add on that, I think that's a really, really good point about that core content and the core theme. So having one really good, well thought out, a core piece of content that you can then build upon. And that's where AI can be really useful, versioning, for example, and reformatting. So, but having that strong foundational content at the core is absolutely key. And I think, that's not always the case, but that's definitely the right way to go.
So what I'm hearing is the hero foundational piece is crucial to the process. So I think the title of this session is Thought Leadership That Converts. So what's the relationship between engagement and conversion, especially when we're talking about the hero, the foundational piece? Does engagement precede conversion, or are we measuring the wrong signals?
I think all the research shows that high quality content drives conversion, right? And I think, again, back to, in the age of AI, trust is absolutely paramount. And I think if you've got good, high quality content that is truly engaging, that, all the rules that have always applied to content still apply. Is it topical, relevant, useful, educational, as opposed to overly salesy? We've all seen white papers or things purporting to be white papers that are actually a sales brochure. So I think having that really high quality core content that is truly engaging absolutely drives conversion. And there's a lot of research that backs that up. I think that, I saw a stat recently that it's up to 6 times as likely to convert if it's truly engaging. And again, I think that comes back to understanding the audience, perhaps personalizing it. As Roisin said, maybe talking about how that content works for different parts of the audience you're going to. If you get that right, you not only make it engaging, but you build trust in the brand. And ultimately, when it comes to the buying decision, it's all about trust, right? So if you've built that through high quality content, in my view, you're absolutely driving higher conversion.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I
and I
agree that
think
trust is paramount. Sorry, Roisin.
no,
Please.
no worries. I was just going to say, I think, trust and also kind of emotional connection. I think your content really has to have and really has to reach people and address their pain points and kind of reach them emotionally. And that to me kind of drives higher engagement. And, when you think about engagement and conversion, high engagement numbers absolutely can be incredibly seductive, because, you're measuring likes, you're measuring attendance, you're measuring content downloads. But if you're looking at that in isolation, you're just often validating the reach, but not the intent. So then the question becomes, well, what did that person, how did they engage, and what do they do next with that piece of content? And that, kind of really gets into where the buyer is in the buyer journey, and what do you send to them next, and how do you follow up on that piece of content as well. So, how do we get to my kind of more qualified conversations as a result of that conversion and engagement, and how do we kind of move the buyer down the buyer journey, not necessarily kind of looking at the top of funnel volume, or, as we used to say, not looking at the actual production value of content versus the consumption.
I'm
I
right there
think
with you. So what would you say the KPIs that partner marketers realistically should expect from content to influence the reader and get that engagement?
That is a great question. I think definitely you still need the engagement numbers, right? But then it's the actual conversion. And then, as I said, I think we need to be looking at and developing metrics and KPIs around what did the person do with that piece of content? How long did they spend reading it? Did they download it? Can we tell where they went next with that piece of content? If, for example, where are the other touch points that we need to bring to bear to engage further with that customer? Are they going to be, that person who downloaded that content, are they going to be showing up at an event that we're present at? How can we get them
Mm.
engaged there? How can we reach them more on their digital journey? And those, I think, are some of the more nuanced and more deeper KPIs that we're all going to have to start to think about.
Yeah,
Stuart?
I'd agree with that. Yeah, I agree. I think the more important measure is actually engagement. I think if you get that right, conversion comes, right. So if you focus that measurement on engagement. All the things Roisin just touched on, how people are using it, whether they're sharing that content, whether they're reading similar themes in different formats, whether different people within the buyer group that you're targeting are also engaging with the same content, maybe in different formats. That engagement measure is the key one for me. If you're getting that right and you're seeing increasing levels of engagement, or you're seeing one piece of content or one theme working better than another for engagement, conversion will follow. And I think, the conversion metric we all know is a lot harder to be accurate about, and some of the traditional conversion measurements are disappearing. But again, I think if you've got engagement right, then that naturally follows. So I would focus on the engagement measurement first.
Love that. Love that. Now, Stuart, you've touched on it. You've brought it up a couple times now. You've talked about it, and I think it's something that we can't avoid. So let's talk about AI. The buzz is pervasive in our daily lives, but there are real efficiencies and gains. So is AI making content better or just noisier?
Potentially both. I think it's definitely making it noisier. We're seeing, as we've already talked about, a ton more content because of AI, and there's some terrible content out there as a result. I think everyone can smell AI slop. It's dangerous, I think, for brands to use AI too heavily in that respect, because it takes a long time to build trust in a brand and build brand equity. It can disappear instantly with bad use of AI. Having said all that, I think it is an incredibly useful tool. But I think it's kind of back to Roisin's earlier point about the core content. I fully believe the core content, the foundational content, has to be created by human subject matter experts, genuine writers that really understand what they're talking about. If it's in security, for example, writers that really understand security audiences and the security subject matter. They create that foundational piece of content. But using AI in a smart way, that can speed up the process. It can help with idea generation. It can then help with versioning. It can help with formatting. All the things Roisin said about, if you take that core and you turn it into different formats, AI is perfect for that. But again, even then, I think it's got to be fully human checked. Someone described AI tools as like, you're kind of overconfident intern. I think it's a perfect description, right? They'll tell you it's going a certain way, but I think you've still got to check everything. You've definitely got to fact check anything that you're using AI for. But I think it can be a really useful tool to help versioning and formatting and using core foundational content well. But I absolutely don't think it should be used to create content at scale, because I think, especially in partner marketing, I think that's where danger lies, honestly.
I love the overconfident intern factor.
It's not mine. I don't know where it came from. I can't claim it, but it's a great description.
It's a great description. It's a great analogy. Now, Roisin, ServiceNow is an AI forward company, so I think you guys are using it, to your advantage. But what is your take on AI and content?
I think it's amazing, like just the kind of ability to do things faster and to kind of get some kind of brainstorming and start some ideas, etc. is phenomenal with the AI tools that we've used. But I also think that, totally reiterating what Stuart just said, it's great for speed. It's good for synthesis. But if everybody uses the same AI tools with the same prompts, then you get content that looks the same, sounds the same, and kind of, at the end of the day, really blurs together. So where we've kind of seen distinctions really are using AI to accelerate the production of content, but protecting the perspective that makes it distinctive. And so that really is where the human kind of aspect comes in, because in partner marketing, that perspective has to reflect the kind of combined experience or the combined messaging of both organizations, the customer problems you've solved together, the industries you understand. And AI can't really manufacture that. It can amplify it once it's there, but you really do need that kind of core human element to also make it emotionally engaging to the person that's going to be reading it, and really taking into consideration where they are in their buyer journey. What is their buyer group? What are the challenges they are having? And AI really, at this point, cannot do that. So it definitely needs that kind of human check and that human perspective.
For sure. No, I love that you bring up the human element of it all. Now, our team did some pre-work and gathered some questions from our listeners, and one of them aligns to exactly what you're talking about. And the question is, should partner marketers prioritize becoming a topic authority for AI engines? Again, really kind of understanding the AI engine landscape and knowing, how do I position my content? So what's your take on that?
Well, I
Um,
think
sorry.
kind of gets into, for me anyway, it starts to get into storytelling and, why that matters, right? And that's where I think that whole AI piece really kind of gets into the actual AI, maybe content creation, and then the human aspect in terms of what are people buying? Because customers are customers and our partners' customers. They're not buying platforms, they're buying outcomes. And outcomes only land emotionally when they're told as stories. So, the storytelling aspect is super important. Like a CIO, for example, at a life science company doesn't connect with the capability slide. They'll connect with hearing how a company like theirs actually reduced audit cycles or accelerated drug trial workflows using a joint solution. That's kind of where their emotional kind of connection will come into play. So you're telling a story that needs to kind of resonate with them. And I think that's where the persona driven storytelling becomes really critical, because you have to know the thread of the story to pull through for each audience. And then you have to build the content for them without being generic.
Love
Yeah,
it.
I would also
Stuart,
say,
yeah, please do.
yeah, I think obviously we've got to be conscious of creating content for AI engines, but I think it's got to be written for humans first. If it's written for humans first, you can then format it so it's also going to get picked up by those engines. But I think it's a danger if you write for AI. I think if you do that, then you compromise the quality of the content. So I think it's human first, and absolutely think about what you need to do with that existing human created content to then make it more attractive to AI engines. But I think definitely human first. In terms of the storytelling piece, and Roisin's mentioned it a couple of times about the sort of emotional connection. That's hugely important. I think it's often forgotten in B2B and partner marketing. I think there's a tendency again to think of emotional connections and emotional decision making to be more of a consumer thing than it is a B2B or a partner marketing thing. And every bit of research I've seen, in fact, at my previous agency at Gyro at Dentsu, we did a ton of research on emotional connections to brands, and it's hugely emotional decisions. It's still a lot of gut feel. There's still, people are betting their careers on their decision making around which partners they work with, for example. So, especially in tech, these are huge decisions. So, again, making that emotional connection with people that are consuming the content is very, very important, and thinking of them as people, which I think is not always the case in some of the content I've seen.
No, I thank you for that perspective. And Roisin, we're going back to you because you've brought up a lot of great points and what you said previously. You talked about personas and how important that is to kind of understand the persona that you are speaking to. I think that also, understanding the buying groups, you had mentioned kind of a shift to buying groups and committees, the IT, finance, sales, you name the group. How should partner marketers kind of rethink content when they're selling into a buying group rather than an individual?
Yeah, and definitely, we've seen, and research has proven too, that there are many more people involved in the overall buying decision than there were previously, and they're actually groups of people, and there could be up to 12 to 14 groups of people depending on the size of the organization, potentially even more. And you have to know kind of when to reach each one of those and at the right time and with the right piece of content. And I think, in terms of what marketers had traditionally looked at in terms of a funnel, it's not really a funnel anymore. It's kind of like touch points all over the place. And buying groups in, these enterprise deals, they're non-linear, they're multi-threaded, and they're often happening, these things are and decisions are often happening in conversations that you're actually not in the room for. So the shift I'd advocate for is from push content to pull content, to create content that different members of a buying group can actually discover, that they can share internally, and that they can use to champion the solution themselves when you're not in the room for those conversations. And so really that means, I think, from a partner marketing point of view, having really distinct content assets for the economic buyer, for the technical evaluator, for the end user, and not one piece that really tries to serve all three. And I think that really means investing in content that will travel. and, having that one story, but making sure that it fits to the different lens of the different buying personas within that buying group.
I think you're
Yeah,
spot on. Please.
Yeah, I would agree with all. I would agree with all of that. I think that the old funnel is dead. It is totally non-linear now, and then you throw into that mix the different consumption habits. If you think of whatever it is, 70% of the buying decision group is now millennial. You've now got Gen Z entering the workforce, well into the workforce, consuming information in a different way. You've got the effects post-COVID of working from home, and maybe it's affected the group buying dynamic. So all these things are virtually impossible to map. So to Roisin's point, the old model where you'd say, okay, at this stage we're going to do this, then they're going to need some more technical information, then they're going to need something for finance. You can't map that anymore, but you still have to have it all. So I think that is, as Roisin said, is absolutely a shift to pull. And that then means you've got to have not only good content, but you've got to have lots of formats and rip this part of it again to the same theme, but this has got to skew towards the finance decision maker. This is for the more technical person, whatever. So again, it all comes back to quality, lots of variations, regularly updated content to help them find it themselves. And I think that we used to touch on this a little bit at my last agency as well, around the sort of consumerization of this decision making in B2B and partner marketing. In as much as people have an experience in their personal life, I won't name the company, but the company where I buy things from, it knows what I want. It'll suggest things for me, and again, they expect a similar experience in their work life. So you should know what content I want. You should be serving the next thing to me because I've read that thing. And I think the final thing I would say on it is, there's a lot more of it done in the dark now. There's it always. I mean, there is the standard stat where you'd go 70% of the way down the old funnel before you'd engage with sales, for example. That varies obviously depending on region and offering and so on. But it's still largely true. But I think there's a lot more self-serve. There's a lot more of that research done in the dark funnel, and that again. You cannot have the traditional, just the old push model. You've got to have content out there that they can find, that they can engage with, share, work with peers and so on. So it's more complex, but I think it all comes back to a really smart content approach can solve many of these new challenges.
So with all this content being created, and I think you guys are both spot on that we need content, you need quality content, but how does one manage the workload of creating all of this content?
So I think that's it's a really interesting question, and it's a challenge, right? No one. I think on the one hand, you've got some companies that are just thinking, well, AI solves it all, right? It's the sort of panacea. I can just do it all with AI. I don't need a content team. Save a ton of money, and as we've discussed at length, that's not the way to go. So, but I think there are ways to do that. Yeah, we've maybe made it sound like you've got to have 4,000 pieces of content every month to be in the game. That's not the case. I think, again, to Roisin's earlier point, if you invest in good core content, so you need to work with good subject matter experts that are trusted and vetted, that can create the content, the foundational content you need. And I think also what people often forget is there is an awful lot of subject matter expertise within companies and within partners, right? So there's always this idea that you've got to go out and find the subject matter expert that understands it to go and write the white paper or the whatever the content might be. And that's valid and that's really important. But equally, if you've got good subject matter experts within your company or among your partners, good content partners can help extract that knowledge from them. They might not be great writers, but if you've got the right people interviewing them and turning that into great content, you can take that great subject matter expertise, that great knowledge, which there often is in spades within these companies, and you can turn it into great content. So I think that's a bit of a shortcut where you might say, yeah, there's the person over here who's really good at that, but they're not a writer, or they haven't got time. That's it's not that hard to extract it from them if you've got the right partners to do it. So I think if you're careful about it, if you're using the right partners, and then if you're leveraging AI to then version it and reformat it and so on, it's not too onerous to do a really good job on content without having a cast of thousands and a huge team.
Sure. Roisin, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I'd say two things really quickly, just to kind of add on to that. And one is the quality of the inputs. So kind of setting up essentially what your creative brief is and making sure you know who your subject matter experts are and doing a lot of prep. It's kind of like painting, right? You do so much prep and you tape off everything and you put plastic sheets on everything. And, the actual painting is probably sometimes, well, depending on the room, but the actual painting is sometimes the smallest part of the job. Sometimes I always find the longest part is actually taping and the measuring and all of that. And I think that's relates to content very appropriately because I think a lot of it comes into what is all the preparation that you've done up front. Do you have a really good creative brief? Have you teased out what everything is from the subject matter experts that you have? And I think the other part, once the content has been created, like what's your content management system look like? I mean, I think that that's super important. Like what is your tagging? How do you tag the metadata? How do you tag the actual, personas? How do you kind of make sure that your content is stored in a repository where everybody can access and can take advantage of really great content? And then that kind of also gets into the quality versus quantity, right? If you have a really good content management system, you've already done all the prep work and set up the brief, then everybody can have access to also to avail of that content and syndicate and curate that as well.
That's
No,
just
love
to
that.
build on that. Just to build on that very quickly. That's a really important point. When you're working with numerous partners or across multiple regions, another thing that is important is control of the content, because we've all seen, where you've got great foundational content in right formats, and someone will go a bit rogue, and will change that content or add to it or make it more salesy or, put a new headline on it or whatever. So, for example, we've worked hard with a partner to get those kind of checks and balances in place. So we've got a system that allows that content to be disseminated but controlled. So there's a certain amount of flexibility locally that and changes can be made, but it ensures that the core content, the core messaging, the core themes remain absolutely consistent. I think that's really important because it can get watered down and the quality can drop if you're not careful how you manage that.
Agreed. I think, governance guardrails are necessary, and especially when both of you have kind of brought up regions. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about it from a global scale. We're making all this content and we need it available to not only our region, but to, other regions globally. So if we're putting governance guardrails on there, like what's the difference between translation and true localization, and how do you put those guardrails on the main topic or the main gist of the content? And Roisin, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. I mean, to me, translation is really the definition of translation is really changing the language, and localization is really changing the relevance. And I've actually seen this play out a lot in various kind of partnerships and partner content that we've created, where something that we've built for North America, for example, gets localized, and we swap the language, we swap the currency, but it falls flat in EMEA or it falls flat in Asia because the customer references, the regulatory context, and even the business priorities are very, very different. So, the guardrails that work then are the ones that distinguish between what has to stay consistent. So your brand, your core message, your legal compliance, and then what can be adapted locally, like the examples, the tone, the channel mix, those kind of elements. And then the governance frameworks, if they're too rigid, they kill the relevance as well. And the ones that are too loose actually create chaos. So the sweet spot is kind of like that modular approach to content with the kind of global, at least, overall kind of content architecture. And then that is the strong core. And then local teams can build and can relate and can localize, not just translate. And they can do that rather than having to kind of create the whole thing from scratch.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point around localization. So the other thing I would add to that, so as Roisin said, I think translation in certain markets is absolutely vital, and I'll come back to that. And then localization, understanding, it could be a case study that's utterly irrelevant in Germany because it's a US company, for example, that no one's heard of locally. The third bit I would add to that is transcreation and true adaptation. So what I've seen quite a lot in the past is basic translation but it loses local, cultural references or nuance, or the humor doesn't work in a particular country. So, what we would always recommend is full trans creations, especially it's true in content, sort of thought leadership content is a bit different, but in terms of advertising, for example, you have to have trans creation locally. If it's also, when you're translating content and localizing content, you then got to think about how deep do you go. So, for example, if you take a white paper and you translate it beautifully into German and you have it checked by a local office, for example, and you're happy that you've got the translation and transcreation right, that's kind of the first step. But then if someone responds to that, if they hit the landing page and everything's in English, or the landing page is in German, but then so kind of how deep do you go? And we don't believe you have to, have a fully German website for everything that you put out there, but there are layers. And I would say, at the minimum, a landing page. So if you've got a piece of content that's out there in local language, then typically you'd want the landing page and maybe some surrounding assets, maybe nurture follow-up in local language too. So all of that has to be thought through. And there are regions where English will work. And if you cannot do it everywhere, there are certain regions where you can be comfortable with English, but there are others where it's an absolute requirement to have localized content. So they're the kind of some of the watch outs I would recommend.
Thank you for that. So, I mean, from what you guys said there, it sounds like not all content is a hit. Not everything lands with everyone. So can each of you share an example of content that didn't work for you, or that you were a part of, and what you learned from it?
Yeah, I can go on that one. I've had quite a few that have failed over my career, but quite a few that have landed successfully. But one that, I kind of think about that comes to mind was a piece of content that we had developed that was more kind of around broad awareness for a partnership. And we put that out there before the actual joint value proposition was really clear. And we had some great production values, we had strong distribution, solid engagement, but very little downstream conversion. And so what I learned from that was that content quality and content clarity are not the same thing. If the audience can't immediately understand why this matters and what specifically these two companies do together, you've created noise, not necessarily signal or something that will lead to stronger downstream conversion. So what I've learned from that is we ask much earlier in the process, can someone who doesn't know us together watch this and explain back in really simple English or really simple language, essentially, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And if not, then we have to go back to the brief because we have to make it simple. And that's one thing that I've learned, like not to go out too far ahead of the actual kind of joint value proposition that is very clear and very easy to articulate.
That makes sense. Stuart?
Yeah, I've got two that from clients that shall remain nameless from in my past, thankfully. One was it was supposedly thought leadership content, but it was very focused on the competition and how bad the competition were. And it's quite we see it in American advertising quite a lot, where there'll be some very clear call outs of the competition and how terrible they are versus the offer you have. But this wasn't an ad. This was content, and it was in German, and it absolutely fell flat. That just doesn't work there. The other more broad example, I guess, is I've seen a lot of times where supposedly thought leadership content is pure sales. There's the broad 80-20 rule, right? If you're writing some thought leadership content, you can have some promotional elements to it. You can have kind of 15-20% of that can be about how good your offering is or whatever. But predominantly, it's got to be about an opinion on that topic. And showing thought leadership and being quite magnanimous almost and quoting other people. And this was hard sell sales copy. And I remember it went through a number of iterations to end up there. And so, that didn't work well at all. So again, I think if it's a piece of sales material, absolutely fine. But if you're standing it up as thought leadership, make it thought leadership.
Absolutely. No, there's a time and a place for salesy content. And those are in sales plays, playbooks, if you will. So I absolutely heard, Chef. So looking ahead into 2026, And this is probably, you can look at it from a broader sense or you look at it from a partner sense, but what will separate teams who win with content from those who struggle? Like what's the recipe here?
Yeah, I think
Sorry, oh,
the
so,
winners will be teams that treat content as a strategic asset and not just a production output. I think that just is, so kind of fundamental. And I really think that means kind of going to the back to the area of having clarity on the joint narrative and the brief and the inputs that you're getting before spinning up any campaigns, before investing in customer evidence and building content operations that can scale. So those are areas I think that will kind of really separate out the partner teams who will win. And AI will have a role here. It'll level out the production playing field. And so the differentiation for partner marketing teams will really have to come from the insight, the relationships that you have, and then the kind of actual customer stories and the real life use cases that those bring to the table. And I think that teams that really kind of continue to have that strong human editorial voice, they understand their buying groups deeply and they can localize with real relevance, they will be the ones that will pull ahead. And I think the teams that will struggle will be the ones chasing the volume and measuring probably the wrong things. So that would be what I would see as what will separate partner marketing in terms of thought leadership content in 2026 and beyond.
Thank you. Stuart, maybe a broader view?
yeah, I'd agree with all that. I think the one that really stood out for me there is the strategic approach. I think first and foremost that it is a properly thought out long term content strategy. So it's not reactive. It's not massive focus on just the data and then as an afterthought we need some content to fill this, or how can we quickly produce it and then maybe not pay attention to it for a while. So that strategic approach, long-term approach, and it has to have proper investment and it has to be continually updated and monitored, because I think that too often it might be a great start. There'll be all the great intentions and it's strategic focus and they'll create some good content and then it kind of fizzles out. And then you'll see content that might be 4 years old, because even great content, it has a shelf life. There's some evergreen stuff out there and there's nothing wrong with, evergreen content that still resonates and you can reformat it. But really you need to be keeping it topical and keeping it updated. And I don't think that's always the case. So yeah, strategic, long-term, focus on quality, focus on real subject matter expertise and content that is actually useful. I think that's what's going to make it engaging. So be able to do all of that, I think, and as Roisin said as well, with that eye on localization and ensuring it's correctly adjusted for whatever market is the final part of that. But if you do all of that, then I think that's a winning strategy for 26.
I love it. That's brilliant. Well, I think we've come to the end here. I think we've shared a lot. You guys have definitely put some thought into this conversation. I think our listeners are going to appreciate and be able to take away some action items here. So, listeners, if today resonated, connect with our guest on LinkedIn, Stuart, Roisin. Thank you for the thoughtful conversation. And if you're rethinking how your partner content connects to pipeline, that's exactly the work that we do here at PartnerVista. Hit us up in the DMs or direct note to our inboxes. We'd love to hear from you. So thank you very much. And once again, Stuart, Roisin, thank you for everything.